time's the ticket here. We want to start, and Robyn Vining is joining us, but we want to start with our chat just to get a little spirit in here, okay? Other people are coming in. And this is a chant that Julie and I in 350 Milwaukee developed. Julie and I were working in Africa in terms of climate work at a World Social Forum, and we met climate activists from Nigeria who were working against Dutch Shell, who was polluting the Niger River in terms of the water they drank, what they bathed, and just all kinds of things. Horrendous situation. So this chant started with them about keeping in the ground, about oil, about gas, and about coal, and we've added the rest into a big educational tool for us out of 350. So I will lead it, and it's a call and response. And so what I say, I ask everybody to just join in, and we'll keep it going. Okay, family? Climate justice.
Climate justice.
Keep it in the ground.
Keep it in
the ground.
Keep the oil under the soil.
Keep the oil under the soil.
Keep the gas under the grass.
Keep the gas
under the grass.
Keep the coal in the hole.
Keep the
coal in the hole.
System change.
System change.
Not climate change.
Not
climate change.
Renewable energy.
Renewable energy.
Sustainable life.
Sustainable life.
Peace and love.
Peace and love.
We are 350 Milwaukee. Thank you. Julie,
Yes.
you want to take it from here?
Okay, let's kick this off. So I think a lot of us have a lot to learn about gerrymandering and the impact that it has on all of our issues that we work on, because we really need to have some response from our state legislature and from our national legislature in order to move the climate action that we want in the right direction. And that is going to mean getting people elected to office who can do the right thing. So here we are with this gerrymandering issue that surfaced in Wisconsin right at this point in time, actually, very strongly. And we have a perfect person to talk about this, an old friend of George's and mine, Matt Rothschild, who is the former editor of Progressive Magazine for many years, and that's how we first knew him, and then has moved on now away from monthly deadlines. I imagine he's very glad of that, being a magazine editor. And he's heading up with the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, which is very, very involved to this point in this gerrymandering issue. So I'd like to welcome you, Matt, and you can take it from here and tell us everything you know.
Well, thanks so much, Julie, and thanks to you and George for inviting me to speak with 350 Milwaukee this evening. It's always great to see you, and thanks for the amazing work you both have done and continue to do over all these many years. Thanks to everyone else on the Zoom and for your activism on this crucial issue. It's nice to see so many old friends and to make some new friends tonight. You know, I want to talk to you about a couple reasons our democracy doesn't work and how that relates to the climate catastrophe we're all facing. Our democracy doesn't work because of some huge problems, like systemic racism, like the new rise of the far right, like economic inequality, like big money in politics, and like gerrymandering. And I don't have time to talk about all those tonight, so let me just touch on a couple: money in politics and gerrymandering. I'm going to mention a study we did last year at the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign called the Filthy 40. We were showing the influence of the biggest right-wing players in the money game in Wisconsin and how they adversely affected climate here in Wisconsin. Together, they contributed and spent $110 million during the Walker years. Hello? During the Walker years to pass laws and policies that were detrimental to our environment. The two biggest players were Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce and the Koch Group, Americans for Prosperity. Robin Vos, Scott Fitzgerald, and Scott Walker were the water boys for WMC and Americans for Prosperity. You know, that's how the game's played. They serve their big donors. They don't serve the people of Wisconsin. So that's one big problem. That's not how democracy is supposed to work, but it's how it's working these days. We, the people, don't get what we want because many of our elected officials, they don't care about us. They care about their donors. 63% of Wisconsinites, according to a Marquette Law School poll, understand that the climate crisis is a serious issue, but our elected officials make the crisis worse because they don't care what we think. They care who's lining their pockets, and if it's big business and the fossil fuel folks, they'll keep destroying the environment. Nor does democracy work when one party that just happens to be in total control during the year of the census can rig the district maps to keep themselves in power for another 10 years. That's called gerrymandering. It's an American term, if ever there was one. Actually, it's about 200 years old, and it was born in Massachusetts when a guy named Governor Gerry was in power and his party was in power. He got the census data, and then he drew some funny looking maps to ensure his party's control. One of the districts was so odd looking that it looked like a salamander. So people put the word Gerry and salamander together and gave us the word gerrymander. It's a name that has stuck ever since. And here in Wisconsin, in 2009, the Democrats, and it may seem hard to believe, but they had control of the state assembly, and they had control of the state senate, and they had the control of the governorship with Jim Doyle. They could have passed a law to ban gerrymandering. Actually, they introduced a law to ban gerrymandering, but the leadership of the party wouldn't bring it to a vote. Why not? Because power is the most intoxicating drug on the market. And they thought they'd hold on to power and that they'd be able to rig the maps for themselves in 2011. Well, look how that turned out. In the 2010 elections, the Republicans swept control of the state assembly, they swept control of the state senate, and of course, Scott Walker was elected governor. As soon as they were elected, they wasted no time in rigging the maps once they got the census data. They didn't do the people's business in the people's house, however. They ran across the street into the glass bank at the Capitol, across the street from the Capitol, drew the maps in a room that became known as the map room in the cushy law offices of the right-wing law firm Michael Best and Friedrich. And the map room was a locked map room. You weren't allowed in. The people of Wisconsin weren't allowed in. The media wasn't allowed in. Democrats sure weren't allowed in. And even Republicans who weren't in leadership weren't allowed in unless they got permission from the young staffers of the speaker who held the keys to the locked map room. And before Republican legislators could leave the locked map room, they had to, catch this, sign an oath of secrecy. They couldn't tell anybody about what they saw in that locked map room. Now, that's not how democracy is supposed to work. That's 180 degrees from how democracy is supposed to work. It's supposed to work in sunlight, not in darkness. It's supposed to be done in the open and not in a locked map room. But you know what? They knew what they were doing. They actually flew in a political scientist all the way from Oklahoma City to come to the locked map room with his fancy software and draw 9 incarnations of rigged maps, each one predicting a larger Republican majority in the assembly, simply by moving a line here or moving a line there on the map, not by getting more actual votes. And the leadership then rammed through one of the most aggressive maps, and it became law, and it worked great. Democrats would win 54% of the aggregate vote for assembly candidates, but Republicans would still hold on to 63% of the seats in the assembly. Now, that's good rigging if you can get away with it, and they got away with it ultimately. Not before a panel of federal judges ruled that it was unconstitutional and one of the worst gerrymanders in modern American history, but the US Supreme Court came to their rescue, and so those rigged maps have stood. And when you have rigged maps, again, the elected officials don't have to listen to huge chunks of their constituency because they're in safe seats. All they have to do is listen to their party bosses. Once more, we the people don't get what we want. We have a crisis of representation in America right now, and gerrymandering is a big part of this crisis of representation. But a great thing's happened over the last decade here in Wisconsin. A tremendous mass movement has arisen at the grassroots to demand an end to gerrymandering in Wisconsin. As the map behind me shows, 55 counties have already passed resolutions or referendums in favor of independent, nonpartisan redistricting. You all in Milwaukee have done both. And we also have Governor Evers' People's Maps Commission, which has been holding public hearings all across the state to get input from all of us about how fair maps should be drawn. They're not in the locked map room. They're all over the state getting our input. And their next public hearing is this Thursday at 5:30 p.m. And you can find out how to tune in by Googling the People's Maps Commission. I was just there about a half hour ago. And that commission, once the census figures comes out, will draw its own maps. And I can guarantee you there'll be much fairer maps than the ones Robyn Voss is going to draw. But Voss, unfortunately, has got no obligation to honor the people's maps. So he's likely to toss them in the garbage and rig the maps again, or at least try. And when he does that, we need to call him out on it. We need to call all our legislators and demand that they reject rigged maps. And I imagine we'll have a big demonstration at the Capitol in Madison to keep the pressure on, and we'll do a lot of media activism as well. I think we'll get better maps this time around. I'm very optimistic about that. I'm hoping that our pressure campaign works, and even if it doesn't, Tony Evers will be able to veto the rigged maps, and then they'll end up in court. And a judge may appoint someone to draw new maps, and if that happens, they should be more fair than the ones that Voss drew. The ultimate solution here is to pass a law to ban gerrymandering and give us fair maps. That's what the people want. 72% of the people of Wisconsin want this, according to a Marquette Law School poll. That includes 63% of Republicans and 76% of independents. And the momentum is building for this. Last year, 5 Republicans co-sponsored a bill in the legislature introduced by Senator Dave Hansen and by Representative Robyn Vining, who we're going to hear from in just a few minutes. I'm really looking forward to hearing what she has to say on this. But that 5 Republicans, that was 4 more than ever before. And so that's a good sign. And I've heard from Republicans that there are, as many as a dozen more would like to sign on to such a bill if, the speaker will let them do it, or if they're brave enough to break the party line and do what their conscience tells them to do. One thing you can do is to urge your legislators to sign on to a similar bill that's going to be introduced this spring by Senator Jeff Smith and Representative Deb Andraka, with Robyn Vining co-sponsoring, I'm sure, though I haven't talked to you yet about that, Robyn, but I'm sure you know more about that than I do. In any event, at some point over the next 2 to 4 years, we're going to build the pressure so high that whoever's running for office, and that includes even Robyn Voss, will have to bend to the will of the people on this one. We've just got to make democracy work here in Wisconsin and here in this country. As Fighting Bob LaFollette said 100 years ago, the cure for the ills of democracy is more democracy, and we need to take that cure, and we need it in a hurry. So thanks for listening to me, and I look forward to hearing what Representative Vining has to say.
Okay, just let me.
Well, thank you, Matt. And I just want to mention, in terms of process, that after Representative Vining makes her presentation, then we'll be open for question and answer. And I will moderate that, and I'll explain the process at that time. So, Greg Walter.
Okay, while I'm doing some of this background work, we'd like to welcome Wisconsin Representative Robyn Vining. In 2018, in winning her first term, she became the first Democrat to flip a Republican assembly seat since 2013. That was the year that Robyn Voss became Assembly Speaker. Made his year, I suppose. Among many initiatives she's advanced in 2019, she was a primary sponsor of Assembly Bill 303. It was a companion bill to the Senate Bill 288, which attempted to create nonpartisan districting reform in Wisconsin. Not surprisingly, those bills failed in the Republican-controlled legislature. In December of 2019, Representative Vining launched the Forward Wisconsin Fair Maps project, and she continues to be active fighting for fair maps, an issue of special importance now. Representative Vining.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. And I'm probably going to sound like Matt a little bit here tonight, but that is good. That is good. I'm here tonight with my, since we have like an Act 10 anniversary. This is my Act 10 protest sign here with me tonight. So it's now 10 years old, and it lives in my office with me to remind me what launched me into caring so much about state politics in the first place. So Good evening. I am State Representative Robyn Vining. I represent the 14th Assembly District, which includes the people of Brookfield, Wauwatosa, and Milwaukee. This is, as you mentioned, my second term, and I serve, just so you know, on the committees on health, mental health, children and families, and small business development. I also serve in the bicameral Children's Caucus. I am a small business owner and my family lives in Wauwatosa. So, on the topic of fair maps is an incredibly important issue to me. In 2018, yes, I was the only Democrat to flip a seat in the state assembly. A Democrat was not supposed to win this seat, but as I say, candidates don't beat gerrymandering, communities do. And my community rose up and we fought with everything that we had. And out of 34,000 votes, we won by about 138. It was very much a we project. And so fair maps is a bipartisan issue. Gerrymandering is wrong when Democrats do it, and it's wrong when Republicans do it. When I got to Madison, the first piece of legislation that I worked on was fair maps. And yes, I introduced that with former Senator Hansen. So this legislation was included in Governor Evers' proposed budget back in 2019, and we were happy to have that included in the budget, but it was unfortunately taken out by the Republicans on the Joint Finance Committee. So soon after, I introduced the Fair Maps bill, and so the way we like to say this is that that we actually had 500% growth in the number of Republicans who signed on, because we went from 1 Republican to 5. And so I like that's much more fun to put it that way. And Matt, I did notice that the math, if you were to say that we had 5 and there's probably a dozen more, then there's 38 Democrats. That does put us over that threshold of 50 to pass the bill. Just to throw that out there. But anyways, so Fair Maps has widespread support across the state. Over 70% support Fair Maps. Now over 55 counties of our 55 of 72 have passed resolutions or referenda in support of Fair Maps. And okay, so People's Maps Commission. When it was clear that the Republican leadership in the legislature would not bring the Fair Maps to a vote, the bill, Governor Evers announced the creation of the People's Maps Commission. I was honored to do a press conference for that with the Lieutenant Governor right here in Wauwatosa. And the People's Maps Commission is a group of individuals selected by retired Wisconsin judges to hear testimony from all 8 congressional districts on how to draw new legislative and congressional maps. They've hosted 5 public hearings. They have 3 more scheduled. Matt just gave you the information for Thursday, I believe. And it's 1 per congressional district. And a lot of people have asked, well, can I go to the ones that are not in my congressional district? And yes, because they're virtual, it's very easy, and get there if you can. So the goal of the commission is to present fair, impartial maps to the legislature that were created by the people for the people. So 2021. This is an important year. This is the year that the maps are drawn, and the new maps will exist for a decade. As old as this sign. Fair Maps is crucial for the future of our state. We see how gerrymandering has hamstrung efforts to pass legislation that is overwhelmingly supported by Wisconsinites, such as climate and environmental policies, Medicaid expansion, gun violence prevention, and other critical measures to improve the lives and livelihoods of the people of Wisconsin. Last week, we saw a debate on the mask mandate that is supported by 72% of the states and failed. So yes, what Fair Maps means for climate and environmental policies. Gerrymandering has stalled efforts to enact meaningful change related to climate and environmental policies. The Republican majority in the legislature controls which bills get committee hearings, which bills make it to the floor for a vote, and what ends up in the state budget after going through the Republican-controlled Joint Finance Committee. And if you've ever seen a Joint Finance Committee meeting, you will see that it's in a big U shape, the desks are, and there are 12 Republicans in the center, and there are just 2 Democrats from the Senate on the end and 2 Democrats from the Assembly on the other end. We are not heavily represented in the Joint Finance Committee, and they determine the state budget. So when your climate and environmental issues don't make it through the budget process, that's part of why. When they don't make it to a committee hearing, it's because that committee chair is controlling which bills get heard in committee. And when they don't make it to the floor for a vote, it's because the Republicans control what makes it to the floor for a vote. So I hope that's helpful. Climate and environmental issues are not inherently partisan. They often have bipartisan support in Wisconsin, but when legislators are insulated by how the districts are drawn, they do not have to represent the interests of the people they serve, and that's not right. So, how to promote fair maps? Like you've heard already tonight several times, contact your legislators now and through the redistricting process. Get involved with the remaining People's Maps Commission's hearings and talk about it. And I think you're going to see organizing efforts coming out over the next couple of months, but get involved. Use repetition, talk about it often, talk about it over and over again. I can tell you, I represent a purple district. So I won by 132 votes out of 34,000 votes in 2018. In 2020, I won by over 3,000 votes. I won by 8 points. I won in essentially a landslide in my district. But it's still, I've spent 2 years in a very purple district. I'm telling you, when I knock doors, and I knock doors all the time, legislative doors, we never stopped knocking doors when a campaign ended. Only COVID stopped us. When I knock doors in Brookfield, in very red areas, people care about fair maps. Fairness is a Wisconsin value. It's who we are. And so you can talk about this. This is not partisan. And it's about fairness. And I think a very Wisconsin value for fairness. And you're going to find popularity for fair maps in the reddest of red areas as well as in the bluest of blue. And that is all I've got for you, other than I would just be happy to answer questions alongside Matt, and I'm just really honored to be here. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you, Robyn, and thank you, Matt. We get to our favorite part here, which is question and answer. And I just want to remind people, if you're new to this gathering, in the chat, please put down your contact information so we can stay in touch. Also, that we keep a stack, meaning an order of people who want to ask questions. So on the participant, on the lower section where it has participants, if you click on that, at the very bottom, there's an opportunity to raise your hand. Also, depending upon the version of Zoom that you've got, that might be under reactions. Okay, so so if you click those things, then I can logistically see the order of people who want to ask questions in terms of being fair. So I hope everybody understands that. If it doesn't work for you, start shaking your arms and I'll see you. Okay, so let's open this up and thank you, Robyn, and thank you, Matt. I'm opening up the stack now. Please click in terms of if you have a question or a comment, and if you would introduce yourself. If you're with an organization other than 350 Milwaukee, please mention that, and then direct your question to Matt, to Robyn, or to both of them. Okay? So the stack is open. I'm not seeing anybody yet who wants to start.
We've, George, we've got a question in the chat box, I believe.
Okay, Greg.
You want me to? I can
please.
ask that. It says, before 2011, did counties do a bottoms-up map for their area that went up the chain to the final map? Do counties want to do this?
Yes, it used to be the law that when you're redrawing the maps, you had to start at the local level and use the local district's boundaries and then move from there up. But in 2011, the Republicans rammed through this rig map, and then they changed the law retroactively to say that they can do it that way to just, from the top down. And I think an important part of local control is starting at the very local level with the districts and making sure that they respect local boundaries and not just, throw everything out the window and draw it whichever way they want to get the most representation for their party. That's what's outrageous about gerrymandering. So you're right. It used to be from the bottom up. That used to be the law, but that law was changed, is my understanding. Representative Vining may be able to clarify it even more than that.
I don't have anything to add to that.
Thank you both. Anyone else with a question? I see Phil Smith. Phil.
Yeah, if you, Matt or Robyn, if you guys could explain how does an independent commission go about doing fair maps? What are the key criteria when they start drawing them? Is it percent of voting, Democratic versus Republican in past elections so that they all balance out and we do get equal representation? Or just explain some of the key factors that an independent commission would use.
Matt, do you want to you were just at the meeting tonight, right?
No, but I've been involved in this discussion. I'll start and then I'll toss it over to you. They haven't decided yet what criteria they're gonna use. They're getting all this input from across the state. One model that we've been advocating for with some tweaking to make it the Wisconsin model is the old Iowa model, which has been very successful there for 4 decades now, where they they start from the bottom up. They try to have compact and contiguous districts and natural boundaries. They try not to divide up cities or counties, for that matter, or towns. One of the things that happened in 2011 is the Republicans, they split up Sheboygan, they split up Marshfield, they sprinkled Democrats from those concentrated areas out into rural areas, so they were no longer able to get a Democratic representative out of them. So that was one method. So one thing that we don't want to see happen, and this was part of your question, is for whoever's drawing the maps to take into consideration how a district voted in the past election, not to use political demographic data to try to rig the maps. Because if in Iowa, they don't let the map drawers do that. And in fact, in Iowa, the politicians don't draw the maps. People who are career civil servants draw the maps, and we want to see that happen in Wisconsin too. We want the career civil servants at the Legislative Reference Bureau to draw the maps with specific criteria in the statute that would prohibit them from using this partisan political data that you were referring to.
And those are the people that we rely on for nonpartisan input on various things at the state level. Wisconsin is unique that we have these nonpartisan councils that work for the legislators. They interpret our bills, they come to our hearings, and people can ask questions of them so that there is a nonpartisan voice in the room. And so it's just, a lot of people don't know that we have that in Wisconsin. And I think it's something that's really great about how we do government in Wisconsin. I was wondering too, Matt, because I hadn't heard that they had decided criteria yet, or as far as I knew that they had not. And so they're doing a lot of listening. I know it's important to travel around the state and to really hear who your state is, and to understand how these maps should be drawn. So,
well, thank you. I see in the chat that Charlie Benzinger has a question. Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, okay. How much of a factor is Robyn Voss and his perhaps intimidation? Is that preventing certain Republicans from perhaps voting for fair maps?
Well, I certainly think so. I mean, he is, king boss over there in the assembly. And this is another kind of combination of the problem of money in politics and gerrymandering, because the Wisconsin legislature under Voss and Fitzgerald in 2015 totally rewrote our campaign finance law to give themselves as leaders much more power, to be able to raise so much more money, because they head up their legislative campaign committees. And they changed the law so that individuals could give unlimited amounts of money to the legislative campaign committees, basically to Voss himself. And when Voss has this big pile of money, he can tell any member of his group in the legislature, all the Republicans, you want to be brave and be a hero and do something that I want you to do and vote for a bill to ban gerrymandering, go ahead. But then I'll run someone against you, and I've got this pile of money that I will finance their campaign, and you're going to be out of a job. So do you want to be an assembly person, or do you want to be a hero? You decide. And, that's what he's going to be telling people. And so most people are going to bow to that kind of pressure unless he gives them a pass.
Wow. A real tyrant, it sounds like.
Yeah. And, he has a tyrant's personality, and he now has more power because he helped rewrite that law in 2015 to give the Senate Majority Leader, the Speaker, and the minority leaders actually more power than they ever had before. Also, they let corporations, for the first time in 100 years, give to political parties and legislative campaign committees.
Wow.
I'll tag on something to that. It's a well-known fact in Madison, but not well known outside Madison. I joked earlier that with our 38 Democrats plus our 5 co-sponsors plus our new 12 that Matt suggested we might have, that we could pass the bill. It's a joke because it's not reality. And so here's the thing. Speaker Voss has the 50 rule. And the 50 rule is he will not put a bill on the floor unless he has 50 votes from his caucus. So you're not going to put a bill on the floor that's not going to pass. They just won't do that. They will only put a bill on the floor that will pass, but they will only put a bill on the floor that will pass with the 50 necessary votes out of 99 from their caucus. So they have to have 50 Republican votes out of their now 61, because we took 2 more seats this year. So they're down to 61. So out of their 61, they have to have 50. And so that is coming just from the Republicans. So that just kind of gives you a sense for how that's run as well.
Thank you, Robyn, and thank you, Matt. Joe Dabaniewicz, I hope I'm saying that correctly, Joe. You've got a question.
Yeah, several cities or counties actually in Wisconsin have passed fair maps resolutions, but they're non-binding. How many or what portion of the counties have done that? Does that have any influence on the commission, the People's Map Commission?
Well, 54 counties have passed county board resolutions to ban gerrymandering, urging the legislature to pass a law like Representative Vining introduced last time to ban gerrymandering in Wisconsin, give us independent, nonpartisan redistricting. 28 counties have passed by overwhelming margins referendums of the people voting in their counties. Referendums, non-binding referendums, to, again, urge the legislature to pass this independent, nonpartisan redistricting. It is part of our effort to raise the pressure and to do political education. And so that, whoever's in the legislature will have to at least pay some attention to what the people in their district actually believe on this issue. And that's the thing. We're trying to mount pressure. And we are, of course, the People's Maps Commission members know about all these resolutions and referendums that have passed, so they know that independent, nonpartisan redistricting is a popular demand. And they saw the Marquette Law School poll, I'm sure, that says the same thing. So, the people of Wisconsin have said over and over and over again at every opportunity that we want independent, nonpartisan redistricting. The only question is, when is that going to be reflected in the maps? And when is the legislature actually going to have a majority that's going to vote for what the people actually want? When is democracy actually going to work is the real question.
Thank you.
I would just tag on to that and say, when you have 55 of our 70 or 54, 55, I thought it was 55, but I could be wrong. Out of the 72 counties that have passed that, that means we've done a lot of really strong education over the last few years. And so like, that's just a big applause to everybody who worked so hard organizing on this issue that's outside of the Capitol building and just working hard. But it also should tell you that people know a lot right now about fair maps. So so there's some momentum there.
I just want to clarify on the 54-55 question. 54 counties have passed county board resolutions. 28 counties have passed referendums. One of those counties hadn't passed the board resolution, so it's a different county. So that's how we get to 55 counties.
There it is. All right, good. So we're both right in a different way.
Thank you very much, both of you. Patricia Sumnich asked a question and it's in the chat, to please give the People's Map Commission information for the next meeting, what time and login information. So whoever has that information, if you can type that into the chat, it's available to everyone. And at the bottom of the chat, there are 2 boxes and one has 3 dots. If you click on that, you can save the entire chat and get those kinds of contact information. So thank you, Patricia, for bringing that up. We've got a stack with George Stone, Dennis Merritt. Dr. George Stone, please.
Representative Vining, I was really pleased to hear how successful the fair maps issue is for you at the grassroots level. That's really important. But fair maps is really just one aspect of fair voting access. And if you broaden that out into scheduling, voting days, and the number of polling places available and so forth, is there an effort to broaden out the issue and push it along with other aspects of fair voting access?
Yes. So I co-sponsored last time the automatic voter registration, which I think is a really important bill. And we're going to be, we've been talking about this session, what are we going to introduce? And also, what are we going to fend off? So yes, are we talking about how we can make sure that we have equal access to democracy? Yes, that's a conversation we're having. We're also having the conversation of what kinds of attacks on democracy and voting rights we're going to see that we're going to have to defend or fend off. And so both of those things are things to pay attention to. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. We've got a stack with Dennis Merritt and Dan Folkman. And again, you know, as a facilitator, if you like what you're hearing, you can put a thumbs up or you can smile, you can shake your head. I mean, that helps in terms of the feel from the group as we move ahead. Okay, so Dennis Merritt.
Yeah, this seems to be such a vital issue, and it just seems to be so depressing that we have this here in Wisconsin and other places. And I'm really concerned about, especially how the youth in our country are looking at our democratic systems. So could you say something about how the other states are doing, or kind of what's the national mood? Are you coordinating with people in other states and around some basic messages?
Yeah, I've been on a Zoom convening of states and national groups working on gerrymandering over the last week. You know, today was 3 more hours. We've had 9 hours of convening. We've got 3 more hours coming up. And so there's work going on all over the country on this issue. It's a really hot issue right now. And actually, Wisconsin is just lagging. Other states have, banned gerrymandering by referendum, for instance, when they have binding referendum. We don't have that. Michigan did that 2 years ago. Utah and Missouri even have gotten ahead of us on getting independent nonpartisan redistricting, and a lot of other states are working on it too. So we're falling further and further behind in this area as well as on a lot of other areas. But there is tremendous work being done by a lot of pro-democracy groups, state by state, and then at the national level as well, with groups like the Brennan Center, for instance, or the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. So there's a lot of good stuff happening, and you can find out some of that national stuff just by going on Google and taking a look around.
And I'll say, yes, the young people are not okay with this. And I could joke and say this is why we had like Taylor Swift's song "Only the Young." It's like the first song she donated to the last campaign cycle for a political ad, because young people can change this. Like, we need them to come in with their energy and their excitement and their furor. And frankly, they're really angry that college is so expensive, and they're really angry. And this is visceral. This is like in their bones about climate change. That is something that they feel in their bones, that they know they're going to experience in ways that generations before them have not experienced physically, and that their generations, their children and grandchildren will, this is going to be very difficult, and they are very upset about that. And they're really, really angry, and rightfully so, about gun violence, and that they have spent their education being afraid in every single room that they enter every single day, all day. And so I believe that these young people, they come with a resolve. And I love our millennials, I love our Gen Z, and I love these kids who are coming up, because they're coming with a resolve that they're just not okay with a lot that's going on. They want to make sure that there are equal rights for all human beings. They want to make sure that we address systemic racism. And they're just not going to let us off the hook. And that is just the best news ever. And so I'm very excited for our young people, and I can't be more thrilled that they're going to take over next.
Well, thank you so much. And Dennis, thanks for your question there. We've got a couple people on stack, but I want to acknowledge in the chat, new to us is Lisa Conley from the League of Women Voters in Waukesha. Also Terry Lauder, who's an organizer for Supermarket Legends Milwaukee, and that contact's in the chat. So on the stack, we had Dan Folkman, Banks, and then Mark Haig. Dan Folkman, please.
Excuse
Thank
me.
you.
Go on mute if they're not talking.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We're hearing some.
Yeah, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit, or have you reflect on where we are at this point moving forward. It's like we've been really engaged in this issue for the past several years, so it's like we're running a marathon, but we're now in the last home stretch. And Matt, you described that we can really anticipate the Republicans will pass a highly gerrymandered map. Tony Evers will veto that map. We've got a nonpartisan commission taking hearings, and I'm assuming they'll be coming up with an alternative map. How will all that play out? And it's really in the courts by the end of the summer and throughout the fall. What's the game plan there, and what's the likely scenario, and how can we make that happen?
So
Matt and Robyn, would be great to hear from you.
Yeah, the strategy from the Wisconsin Fair Maps Coalition that we're a big part of is to really flash as much attention, as much spotlight as possible on the process, to make sure that the process is an open process, that the legislature, when they get the census data, if they start to rig the maps, that we'll be blowing the whistle on them right away. We'll be rallying people to contact their legislators to vote against a rigged map and vote for the legislation that Senator Smith and Representative Andraka and Representative Vining is going to co-sponsor for changing our law. And I'm an optimist, but I'm a realist. I don't expect Robyn Vining to come in with any map that isn't a rigged map. And so
Robyn Voss, not Robyn Vining.
Yeah, Robyn Voss is going to rig the maps. Sorry about that. Voss is going to rig the maps. And so then there's going to be a race to the courts. And I think all the work that has been done with the People's Maps Commission and all the work that's been done in the legislature by Robyn Vining and Dave Hansen and Jeff Smith will be, and all the polling data and all these resolutions and referendums, that'll be on the minds of whichever court is looking at this issue. And then we'll have the People's Maps Commission, which are going to have fairer maps to juxtapose with the maps that the speaker comes forward with. And so I think we'll have editorial writers all over the state at our biggest papers talking about how this isn't the way democracy should work. There'll be a lot of pressure on whoever's drawing the maps by whichever judge is drawing them to make sure that the maps, pass the smell test. And that's why I think we're going to have better maps this time around. But I don't think 2021 here is the end of the story. I mean, I'm not going to rest, and I'm sure Representative Vining's not going to rest until we actually change this law or amend the Constitution of Wisconsin to make sure we have independent, nonpartisan redistricting. I know Representative Diane Hesselbein introduced a bill along those lines last time around. So this is a fight. It's not going to end in this year. We should get better maps this year than we did in 2021, but we're going to keep fighting after 2021.
What's your sense on if the maps will get tied up in court through the 2022 election?
Oh, I don't think so. I think the drop dead deadline really is going to be April of 2022, when people who are running for re-election like you are going to have to file your papers in the primaries. So what I expect to happen is the Census Bureau is going to drop the data by about July 31st to the legislators. They're going to draw the maps in a hurry. There'll be a sprint to the courts maybe by right after Labor Day. And then a judge is going to come down with maps, but before April of next year. And then we'll have some maps that we can look at and see how bad they are or how much fairer they are. And we'll have to operate with those maps for another 9 years or 8 years until we pass this law here in Wisconsin. But I'm confident we are going to pass that law at some point in the next 2 to 4 years. That's my horizon.
So with the maps being what is generally accepted as Wisconsin's maps being the most gerrymandered in the country at this point, if not, we are right at the top. I don't think that there's a scenario where the maps are worse for Republicans than they are right now. Or I guess I should say, it doesn't get better for Republicans than they have right now. It's only going to get worse for them. They're only going to lose seats because they don't represent the state on a whole. And we're just not a state that's that extreme. We know that from our statewide elections and what those districts look like. And so I will say the Democrats, we are gearing up for what we anticipate to be the biggest fight since Act 10. And so we are taking deep breaths and just getting ready. And I can tell you that through the whole last campaign season, I had only won by 130 some votes the campaign before. And this campaign, I was just like fighting with everything I had with the thought of like, I have to be there to protect the governor's veto on maps. Like I have to get back there to protect the maps. And that was the feeling, because that's how you protect justice and equality and the voice of the people. And so we fought through the campaign season like that. And now we are essentially just knowing that we could have the biggest battle since Act 10 ahead of us, and we are all in and ready to fight, because the will of the people is the law of the land. That's what it says on the governor's conference ceiling. And I believe that we are a country where the voice of the people matters. And so we are going to be ready to fight.
Solidarity, sister.
What's that?
Repeat
solidarity.
George.
Yes.
George Stone said solidarity, sister.
Yes. Thank you. Yes.
Okay. We've got a good, and thank you. We've got a good stack call. We've got Greg Banks, Mark Haig, Joe Devanowitz, and then Dennis Merritt. Go ahead, Greg.
Hi, Greg Banks. Adam, can you mute that? Greater Milwaukee Green Party. along the lines of what Dr. Stone was saying about other voting barriers, I'm reading that all across the country, Republicans are trying to pass laws now to put up barriers for write-in voting. Has that been happening in Wisconsin yet?
I haven't seen a bill about that yet. No.
Oh, good. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Greg. Mark Haig.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. I have a bit of an embarrassing civics question. As you've been talking mostly about fair maps in terms of the assembly, but I was wondering if what you said also related to the state Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives, and if not, how do they differ?
Yeah, it relates to all three, and the maps were rigged in all three places. Look at the Senate district that contains the city of Racine, the city of Kenosha. It didn't used to contain both of those cities. Those cities are predominantly Democratic. What happened in 2001 was the city of Racine was in a district that went from the lake, considerably west, and the same with Kenosha. And both of those were purple districts tended to be Democratic, but they were close. And what Republicans decided to do was, well, we don't want two purple districts here that tend to go Democratic. So what we're going to do is we're going to shove all the Democrats in the cities together. So we'll put the city of Racine, the city of Kenosha together into one district, which will be Democratic. And then the rural areas will be in another district, which will be Republican, and we'll have a net gain of one district. And so that's what they did.
Well, thank you, Mark. And thanks, Matt. Oh, Joe Dobonowitz. Joe.
Yeah, I have a question. How corrupted was the U.S. Census in 2020 due to either COVID-19 or the DJT administration? I don't want to use his name.
Well, I hear you. I mean, I think they did everything they can to undercount communities of color, which is a traditional tactic of theirs, and then there was COVID. So I think the census is going to have a pretty significant undercount in those areas, which is unfortunate. The Biden administration has extended the deadline there, so I think there may be some ground gained over the last month or so on the census. But yeah, it wasn't a perfect census. There were a lot of great people doing a lot of great work in Wisconsin to make the census work better in those communities, though. So I tip my hat to all the activism that was done here to try to push back against those who would suppress the count.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. We've got Dennis Merritt and Tom Siri on the stack, but on the chat, there are a couple questions about courts, which we'll get to after Tom. Dennis Merritt, please.
I was thinking about young people again. Maybe you already do this, but it seems that one could get the email addresses of people that are really interested in this. And then as you're monitoring or some objective group monitoring what's happening as the maps are being withdrawn, if there's something really crappy going on, that some message could be sent out together with the name of the legislator from that person's district, so they would very easily be able to contact them, so that there could be some rather immediate feedback and a greater transparency.
Yeah, well, we are putting together lists like this. I mean, Carlene Betchen at the Wisconsin Fair Elections Project, she's the statewide grassroots organizer, has done an amazing job all over the state, communicating with people, giving people instructions on how to testify at the People's Maps Commission. Anyway, they've got a mailing list that's a mile long now, and they're very adept with social media. And I'm sure we will be able to contact people in a moment's notice when the stuff starts hit the fan.
And
Yeah.
how do I get on that list?
Well, I would go to Wisconsin Fair Maps Coalition and sign up there.
One of the fun things about the difficulty of being in a virtual world right now is that I actually have some normally my college interns are from Madison because they go to UW and they work at the Capitol in our office. But since we're virtual, we opened up the opportunity to have interns who are from our district but go to college elsewhere. And so I have 3 student interns who are from Wauwatosa Brookfield. And one of my Wauwatosa students said, I'm really interested in fair maps. I've been studying a lot of it and I have some ideas. And he's like, gerrymandering seems really wrong. Yes, it does. And so he came into my office with that focus. He's at Yale. And so we don't normally get to have students all over the country, but I've got a student at Yale. I've got a student who is remote from her college, and she's at DC working at the Capitol, and another student at a UW school in the state. But yes, one is focused on that, and we tell our interns, like, please help us, like, be better at social media. We're trying to be pretty good at it in my office. But yes, you are right. The power of getting the word out is important, and to get it out across all generations.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks again, Dennis. Tom Siri.
Yeah, I had a couple areas of questions. Sounds like other people want to talk about the courts. I do too. This is all going to end up in the Supremes. Back in '92, when I was involved in that process, the Supremes made a decision, and that wiped me out briefly, but in great detail. So the Supreme is one issue. Given the way the Supreme Court is set up now, it's not. I wouldn't think it'd be very optimistic. And I got to say, I have not read the U.S. Supreme Court case on gerrymandering, but my understanding is they basically said it's hands off, and so I don't know what that does to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. But like I say, I haven't read that U.S. Supreme Court decision. So that's one whole question. The other question is, I mean, this is all about power, and the Republicans have the power, both money and by drawing the lines. But the only way they start to lose power is if some of their members lose elections. And so I think, Representative Vining is a classic example of a turning one vote. It's only one vote, but it gets them nervous and they start to squirm and spend more money, and they'll probably spend more money at her again. The question then is, have you started looking at getting some of these young people to run, looking at the county votes on the referendums and identifying somebody from those counties who's willing to run, whether it's an independent or whatever, against the Republican? Have you, and I realize I'm asking a political question here, but I think I think that's going to be a more realistic way of trying to change this over the next 10 years. Your thoughts?
We flipped my district, and then we flipped the district right next door. So the same demographics, same organizing groups: Wauwatosa, Brookfield, Milwaukee, the southern side of Wauwatosa, the southern side of Brookfield, and now Representative Sarah Russell Rodriguez represents that district. And so I look at it. We study the data like wild. We study ward by ward data, and I have a data team. And so we looked at that math, and but also not just that math, but where are your organizing groups? Because to overcome gerrymandering, it really is a community project, not a candidate project. That really takes more than just a great candidate, in my opinion. That is my opinion. It takes the whole community, and it takes a lot of work. And so you've got to also look at what the community groups are, organizing groups that are in that area that can really do the hard work. But also, is that candidate engaged in the community? Because I do think it really matters if people know who that person is and that person has a network. And that's my opinion. So somebody else may disagree with me, but Matt, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, and I think the two seats that flipped for Democrats, the candidates were running on this issue, among other issues. But this was a big issue, fair maps for them. So it is a popular issue. On the court question, it's unclear where this is going to end up, whether it's going to be in federal court or whether it's going to be at the Wisconsin Supreme Court. If it's the Wisconsin Supreme Court, I think Republicans thought they were going to have a slam dunk, but they don't have a slam dunk even at the Wisconsin Supreme Court anymore because one, Jill Karofsky won the seat last spring, so it's now just a 4-3 majority. And then the surprise of all surprises, Justice Brian Hagedorn has shown an independent streak in some really big cases, so they can't count on his vote either. So that's not necessarily a slam dunk for Republicans at the Wisconsin Supreme Court. It also could go into federal court. And yes, the U.S. Supreme Court had a horrible ruling a couple Junes ago where they took a case where Democrats rigged the maps in Maryland and Republicans rigged the maps in North Carolina. And as Representative Vining said, it's wrong when Democrats do it and it's wrong when Republicans do it. But here was an occasion for the U.S. Supreme Court to say, look, this hyperpartisan gerrymandering's got to stop. And in fact, Chief Justice Roberts said that hyperpartisan gerrymandering is incompatible with democratic principles. That was his quote. Actually, he was quoting Ruth Bader Ginsburg in a previous decision. Incompatible with democratic principles. Why? When the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court acknowledges that, I thought he was going to say the obvious corollary, which is it's unconstitutional, get out of here, you can't do it anymore. But what he said, and this is not a direct quote, was get out of here and don't ever come back. I don't want to see your face at a federal courthouse door again for hyperpartisan gerrymandering. So if Democrats are going to succeed in federal court, they may have to raise issues other than hyperpartisan gerrymandering. They could raise issues of racial gerrymandering. For instance, racial gerrymandering was one case that was upheld in the courts after 2011 when Republicans tried to disenfranchise Latinos in the Milwaukee area. They had to redraw a couple of the districts there. So it's going to be a race, a lawyer's race, a pinstripe race to get into the court the fastest. And the question is which court they will get into, and we don't know that until the gun goes off and the race begins. But whichever court it goes into, it's not going to be a slam dunk for the Republicans.
Well, thanks, Tom, and thanks, Matt. I'll tell you, when we go to the chat, Matt, you must have a magic ball there because you already asked Jerry's question, which is which courts will determine the district, state, or federal. And it can go either way, as we understood. Thanks for your question, Jerry. Before we get to the rest of the stack, I want to refer to Sister Rose Stites, who has a comment to everyone. Sister Rose? Your comment from the chat.
Oh, okay. Well, I think Matt already answered it. The past redistricting went to the courts, and they required the two South Side determinations to be changed, but they left everything else as was, which was the African American area. And so my question is, can we trust the courts? And again, which courts? And we keep saying that if the governor vetoes it, it's going to go to the courts. And so where are we?
Well, I think the hope is just that the courts will be a little bit more fair than what the Republican-dominated legislature is going to be, and that's what we are anticipating.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Sister Rose.
But they weren't the last time. They left everything stand except the Latinos.
Right.
So we've got three on the stack, and an interesting question from Phil Smith. Well, let's take Dan Folkman, then Dennis, and get to the question, then to Greg. Dan Folkman, please.
Thank you. I'm back again. Robyn, you were describing having flipped your district, and I know a couple of other districts recently. We just did one on the north side of Milwaukee as well. Mm-hmm. And I'm hearing a lot of discussion about Democrats and Republicans, but to flip these districts and to get fair maps, it's really a nonpartisan. And there's a lot of very conservative organized groups engaged in the same struggle. Could you share with us a little bit of the interactions that, Robyn, you have as a legislator and Matt as Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, the engagement of the conservative side of our electorate that is also demanding fair, nonpartisan districting?
I think it's very matter of fact to a lot of conservatives that, I mean, and I don't know, it's just like I said, I think fairness is a Wisconsin value, and I think they think fair maps make sense and we should have them, and I think they get disappointed that their party is pushing against it, and I mean, those are the conversations that I have. And I think there's just a sense of disappointment in them that their party is abandoning fairness in the legislative maps.
And I've been working a lot with Dale Schultz, who used to be the majority leader of the Republicans in the state Senate. And he's been for fair maps. He's been going around the state with Tim Cullen for the last 5 years doing a presentation on why we need fair maps. And then I've been working in the Wisconsin Fair Maps Coalition has been working with a couple groups like Unite America is one of them that tends to be more conservative. And then there's some folks in Represent Us that have members across the ideological perspectives on this question. And it's not a Democrat versus Republican, liberal versus conservative issue. I mean, look at the 55 counties. We don't have 55 blue counties in this state. We don't have 25 blue counties in this state. So it's a really popular thing all across the board. And we'll work with anyone who's concerned about fairness and fair maps and banning gerrymandering.
Well, thanks everybody, and thanks Dan for your question. In the chat, Matt has added the website for Fair Maps Wisconsin. Again, you can save that chat or copy it. Dennis Merritt?
Yeah, this goes along pretty well with what Dan was just saying. I was going to ask, given that it is bipartisan and so many people in the state are against gerrymandering, if you go into really red districts and try to find or encourage people to find Republican candidates that are in favor of fair maps, that would counter some of the money that Voss might throw against them. But do you work in that manner in any way?
Well, I don't. At the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, we're 501c3 nonprofit, so we don't do electioneering. So we steer clear of finding candidates and endorsing candidates. I don't mind talking about candidates with my pundit hat on, but I try to toe that line pretty well.
Thank you. And thanks, Dennis. Before we get to Greg Banks, I want to refer to the chat. Hey, Bill Werner, you want to explain what you're talking about in the chat? Bill.
Sure, thank you very much. Is this process going to be super expensive? It sort of sounds like it will. And it seems maybe to me that Wisconsin manufacturers and commerce and other business interests that have been profiting from the current situation are going to do have deep pockets and won't be hesitant to show us that. So will the Fair Maps advocates have the financial heft to be able to see this through to a positive end?
Well, we have stamina. We don't have the money that Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce has. They've spent more than $20 million over the last 10 years to try to get Republicans elected and try to get laws passed and policies passed that help their constituents. So they are a formidable presence, and they're, big money is a serious problem. And we got to, redo our campaign finance law so that super rich individuals, super powerful and rich groups like WMC don't have the wherewithal to distort our democracy the way they're doing right now. It's kind of a chicken and egg problem, I grant you. But yeah, we can beat with people power, the huge money power, if we do our work as well as we can.
I'll second that.
Thank you both. And I had Greg next on, but I missed something here, and I want to refer to Phil Smith. Phil, can you put your proposal out there and we'll get to Greg Banks? Bill Smith.
Yeah, as we were talking earlier about what we can do, I was musing and thinking that, boy, you know, in the last election battles for the presidential election, some of the major law firms refused to get involved with Trump and going to court over a supposed bungled election process. Anyway, then it occurred to me, would it be useful for us to protest at the law firm that's drawing up the maps, like a Michael Best and Frederick? Would that embarrass them into withdrawing from the case, perhaps, or at least putting pressure on them to say that they're doing a very undemocratic thing, and political pressure, just like a lot of other things, can do wonders. Any thoughts on that? Is that worth doing, or no?
I'd love to hear Matt answer this. And Matt, also with the layer of, do you think it will be any different this time with the power of social media and immediate knowledge, immediate news, live casts, etc.? Do you think that'll play into that this time?
Well, I hope it does, and I'm all for nonviolent political pressure. Any way we can put it on people. And if you want to protest in front of the law firm, that's great. If you want to protest in front of ABC Supply because Diane Hendricks has been, funding the Republicans for forever and a day at just an enormous price, more power to you. I was just talking to Dan Bice at the Journal Sentinel yesterday morning about the E-Lines financing so much of Trump's campaign, and Diane Hendricks supporting Trump's campaign, and then the E-Line supporting a group that did the riot on January 6th. I mean, is there no accountability for these folks ever? And what would accountability look like? I mean, if people's accountability is to protest them either on social media or out in the streets in front of their offices, I'm all for all of that.
Thanks, Matt. Robyn?
George, I'm gonna have to hop off in a second. I have to get back to my children before they go to bed, but I would be happy to stay for one more question.
Okay, and we're getting to the our planned end. We have some flexibility. Greg Banks, thank you for waiting. You're up next.
This is a question for Representative Vining. I messed up my question before. What I meant was vote by mail, not write-in voting. So that appears to be happening all across the country, but I think what you're saying is it's not happening yet in Wisconsin, right?
So we introduced vote by mail legislation in April. The Democratic caucus did during COVID. It did not pass. It did not get a hearing. So I will say there are a lot of issues that are not partisan across the country that advocates go across the country advocating for, like sexual violence, various issues that they come to Wisconsin and they don't understand how it's partisan here. And not just partisan, but hotly partisan, very divisive, and way too big of a battle. And so just that being the groundwork, or the baseline. I also am involved with something called the Millennial Action Project. I'm not a millennial. I like to refer to myself as millennial adjacent, which they let me do. But it is a concert of Democrats, Republicans, Independents from across the country who are in elected office and want to work with the other side to get things accomplished. I'm a progressive Democrat, but I want to make sure that we're getting stuff accomplished. So how do we find common ground for the common good? And this is what we talk about. And so we get a sense for what's happening across the country. And I can tell you, Republican attorneys general across the country, they exist supporting vote by mail. And we talked about it a lot last fall as Democrats and Republicans across the country. It's just hard. It's very frustrating that in Wisconsin we don't have those conversations across the aisle about vote by mail. So I don't foresee that as something that's going to happen in Wisconsin. But I did vote by mail for the first time last year, and it was so easy.
So Robyn, we want to thank you, our steering committee, and I'll mention them later. It's more important that you go tuck your children in and keep that good balance there. But we want to thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. So thank you. And thank you for caring about the climate, about the earth, and for gathering and for fighting for those things. It's impressive that you're all here. So thank you. It's been an honor, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your work. Thank you, Matt. I want to go back to Bill Werner. Did you get your questions answered about expense in the pockets in the campaigns, Bill? You're good. Okay.
Yes, I am. I'm fine. Thank you.
All right. All right. Well, I want to hand it back over to what's her name, Julie Enslow, to get some updates. And please stay in as long as you can, because we are going to end with the U.S. Poet Laureate, Amanda Gorman, and her poem on climate. It's wonderful. We'll end the meeting with that. But Julie, you want to give us updates and things?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, I do want to deeply thank our friend Matt Rothschild for being with us tonight. And I think you and Robyn Vining make a very good team. And it was a very energetic conversation and lots of good energy and great information. So we all thank you so much. And just a little update on what 350 is looking at the moment. First of all, our newly elected President Biden has been doing some very positive work in the area of climate, and he's moving things in the right direction. He has some really good people that are working with him on that nationally, and so we have a huge opportunity to really push things in the right direction at this point on that level, even though we have a lot of problems at the state level. And so we definitely need to take a look at the opportunities at the national level. And one of the big things right now that 350 is working at in this area of the country, especially the Madison group and the Minnesotas, is the Line 3 oil line issue. Biden has stopped the major issue of some pipelines, and yet Line 3 is out there on the table, and it's an important one to look into and to give input to. And so on our website for 350, you can check on actions to take on some of these kinds of issues, petitions to sign, places to call. So our 350 Milwaukee website would be the place to go. Also, we have a working group on We Energies out of our local 350 chapter here, and we keep pursuing communications with them and intensive learning about the levels of input that we can have and the changes that need to be made with We Energies prospective plans and even their definitions of what alternative energy is. They still seem to think that natural gas is not a fossil fuel. So that's a huge issue that we need to be able to confront them on. And so that's definitely involved. We're involved with that with our working group. And then next week, next month, we're having John Peck from Family Farm Defenders speak to us. And he's going to be talking specifically about regenerative agriculture, which is a very important aspect of dealing with climate change, because regenerative agriculture can be a huge part of having carbon dioxide absorbed back into the soil, and that the microbes that are healthy and active with that type of agricultural process can then consume that carbon dioxide and be as the soil is actually equally able to absorb CO2 as much as the oceans. And so it's a big issue, and we need to educate people on it and promote that. So next month, John Peck from Family Farm Defenders. That's about it for now, and
we're on schedule.
We're on schedule, and we want to close with this wonderful.
Well, if I might, Julie.
Yes.
We do have a minute.
Okay.
And we've been gathering like this on Zoom for more than a few months. And I think we need to mention to our membership, because it doesn't come up much, our steering committee that leads us and plans these meetings and plans our events and our strategies. And that's Julie Inslow, Greg Walter, Dan Folkman, Charles Benzinger, George Stone, Tom Seary, Terry Wiggins, Mark Haig, Chris Meyer, and Linda Frank. And I want to thank all of you for your leadership. So thank you very much. Julie, moving on to our ending piece.
Yes. So Greg Walter, if you got it all ready to go for us? And we're going to watch this incredible video by our National Youth Poet Laureate, Amanda Gordon.
On Christmas Eve, 1968, astronaut Bill Anders snapped a photo of the Earth as Apollo 8 orbited the moon. Those three guys were surprised to see from their eyes a planet looked like an Earthrise, a blue orb hovering over the moon's gray horizon with deep oceans and silver skies. It was our world's first glance at itself, a first chance to see a shared reality, a declared stance, and a commonality, a glimpse into our planet's mirror. And as threats drew nearer, our own urgency became clearer as we realized that we hold nothing dearer than this floating body we all call home. We've known that we're caught in the throes of climactic changes some say will just go away, while some simply pray to survive another day. For it is the obscure, the oppressed, the poor who, when the disaster is declared done, still suffer more than anyone. Climate change is the single greatest challenge of our time. Of this, you're certainly aware. It's saddening, but I cannot spare you from knowing an inconvenient fact, because it's getting the facts straight that gets us to act and not to wait. So I tell you this not to scare you, but to prepare you, to dare you to dream a different reality where, despite disparities, we all care to protect this world, this riddled blue marvel, this little true marvel, to master the verve and the nerve to see how we can serve our planet. You don't need to be a politician to make it your mission to conserve, to protect, to preserve that one and only home that is ours. To use your unique power to give next generations the planet they deserve. We are demonstrating, creating, advocating. We heed this inconvenient truth because we need to be anything but lenient with the future of our youth. And while this is a training in sustaining the future of our planet, there is no rehearsal. The time is now, because the reversal of harm and protection of a future so universal should be anything but controversial. So, Earth, pale blue dots, we will fail you not. Just as we chose to go to the moon, we know it's never too soon to choose hope. We choose to do more than cope with climate change. We choose to end it. We refuse to lose. We do this and more, not because it's very easy or nice, but because it is necessary. Because with every dawn we carry the weight of the fates of this celestial body orbiting a star, and as heavy as that weight sounded, it doesn't hold us down, but it keeps us grounded, steady, ready, because an environmental movement of this size is simply another form of an Earthrise. To see it, close your eyes, visualize that all of us in this room and outside of these walls or in these halls, all of us change makers, or in a spacecraft floating like a silver raft in space, and we see the face of a planet anew. We relish the view, we witness its round green and brilliant blue, which inspires us to ask deeply, wholly, what can we do? Open your eyes, know the future of this wise planet is right in sight, right in all of us. Trust this earth uprising, all of us bring light to exciting solutions never tried before, for it is our hope that implores us at our uncompromising core to keep rising up for an earth more than worth fighting for.
Thank you, Amanda. She gives hope to all of us for the future.
And as Pat Caddis just said, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you everyone for joining us. And we hope to see you again at our meeting in early March when John Peck will be with us. So thank you.